So let's start with real quick, what's Outset? So why are we all here? What's Outset? So I am Aaron, the CEO and co-founder of Outset. We are an AI moderated research platform. And so just a quick note on what we are, and then I'll kind of jump into more about why we're all here. Outset, we've been around for a couple of years, and what we do is we use AI to help AI moderated research to help people get qualitative data at the speed and scale of a survey. And it's been a really amazing last couple of years to kind of see the industry kind of start seeing AI, thinking about it, being worried about it, being optimistic, all of the feelings around it. And it's been really awesome to be kind of in the center of that and getting to build towards that. And the kind of reason we all talked about it here is that we launched Outset Interactive. This was, I think, 3 weeks ago, which is the first AI moderated usability tool. And so we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But real quick, I wanted to just, I guess, give a quick, you may be wondering as you're watching, maybe you've heard of Outset, maybe you've heard of AI, like give you a couple of examples of where companies are using Outset today, kind of what that looks like. But I won't spend too much time on that because this is not an advertisement for Outset, but rather a conversation. So companies like Weight Watchers and Open Door and Away and a number of large enterprises are using Outset to do video interviews where AI is leading in-depth conversations. And what this is enabling for researchers is to get the scale, to reach more people, to cover multiple markets, and to have like deeper in-depth conversations with large groups of folks. And this kind of gives the speed, the scale, and it allows researchers to get a lot more done, a lot more learned in less time. And I think it's been really cool to see with concept testing, discovery, kind of broader foundational research. And what is like really, I think for us, a big watershed moment is the launch of Outset Interactive, where it's moved from conversational to observational, where you can actually not just hear what people say, but also watch what they do. I mean, it's all like everybody in this room has probably done usability testing before, and you know how interesting it is to hear what somebody says while you watch what they do, and how different those things can be. The kind of the say-do gap, I think, is what the term is, and that is a kind of a really important part of the research we all do, particularly when we're managing digital products and apps and things where people where you really can see what they're doing. So I think this is our first step down that path, right? So for us, this is a big thing where we're incorporating screen share, we're incorporating kind of AI observational capabilities, and for us, we're excited about it, and in honor of that, we figured this is a good time to bring interesting, smart people together to have a conversation about it. We're not going to do like a big Outset demo or anything. I think you're here to have more of a talk more about the future, what we're excited about. But if you want to talk to us, if you want to learn more about Outset, there's a little QR code there, of course. And we'd be happy to kind of give you a more in-depth view of that on a one-on-one or several-on-one basis to go deeper. But for now, I wanted to kind of transition to why we're all here to talk about kind of the future, right, at a more broad level. So I'm obviously really excited about what's possible. I mean, otherwise, if I wasn't, I would not have started a company. We would not be doing what we're doing. So I'm really pumped. I think the newer technology has lowered the barrier to understanding people and humans around the world. Has kind of created all of this like less friction and more opportunity. But that comes in many, that's my optimistic perspective. That's what I believe is possible. And at the same time, there's lots of different paths we can go. Like in a way, AI has made the future feel a little bit more malleable, right? We don't quite know what things will look like. And as a result, there's a lot of interesting paths, interesting things to explore concerning futures that we could be hitting. And so I think that's I mean, this is true across tech, across the world, but it's also, I think, particularly true in research, right? And I think research is a place where this matters a lot. And so it's something I'm passionate about, something the three folks on this call are passionate about. And so we wanted to all talk about it together. So I'm going to quickly intro each of the folks on the phone, and then they're going to talk about some of what they're excited about or concerned about for the future. Cool. Also, during this session, the Q&A should be open. So please please do jump in with questions, and we will, Robert and I here will make sure that they get answered. So as a quick introduction, I'm going to go around the horn. So April is the co-founder and managing director of Adverb Ventures. So that's a venture capital firm investing in early stage tech companies. In addition to that, she's on the board of directors of Zillow Group and Eventbrite, co-founded Angels, an angel investing collective. So there's a lot of experience on the investor side and brings that perspective. But also, before all of that, she was the CPO at Slack for many years through their IPO, as well as a director of product at Twitter through the IPO and a number of other very impressive roles before that, to kind of bring both the product leadership perspective as well as investor. And Behzod is a consultant and advisor who works with incredible startups and massive companies. Through a studio called Yet Another Studio, which is my favorite name for a consulting firm. So Behzod partners with companies like Figma, Dropbox, others to scale research practices and drive decision-making, growth, et cetera. He's also a program partner at Reforge, where he built the user insights for product decisions and effective customer conversations. And he's also a venture partner at All Caps, so he also brings a bit of that investor perspective. And before all that, he led research operations at Slack and was a senior user researcher at Facebook. So you basically have, again, research experience turned consultant for company leadership, as well as investing. And then Alec is the co-founder and CEO of Learners, which is the largest community of UX research practitioners in the world. I've been to many of their events. He is one of the best conveners of people that I've ever met. So I'm just going to give you a moment to blush, Alec. And has brought together kind of incredible leaders from across the industry. And before all this, he had a prolific career as a researcher and product leader himself at various startups and larger organizations. So I kind of like, personally, I was like, this seems like an awesome 3 people to bring together, because you have like, Alec is like, brings all this community and kind of is enmeshed in the community as the convener himself, while Behzod is working right now with leaders at companies to structure research practices in this kind of newer age, and April's investing in new technologies who are kind of disrupting this whole industry. So it's like a really cool combination. So with that, I wanted to pose the question to each of you, and I'll kind of let you answer each, but also feel free to jump in with each other, kind of build on each other, but answer kind of 2 questions. So one is, what is one thing, maybe experience or tool or anything, that makes you most excited about the future of research? And what's one thing that worries you about the future of research? And I think that's a good place to start. And I'm going to throw it to April first.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us together this morning, Aaron. Aaron didn't disclose, but we're proud investors of Outset, and so similar to Aaron's comments, obviously, wouldn't be here today if we weren't already pretty excited about the space. But one of the things I'm most excited about in terms of what Outset's doing, and more generally what generative AI can do around research, is that it really opens the opportunity for research to meet the needs of organizations in more places. And that in every company I've been a part of, including my role at CPO Slack, where I was fortunate enough to have the research team in my organization, including Behzod, there weren't enough Behzods. I mean, one might say there will never be enough Behzods, but we really had to make tough decisions about the types of research we could do. And we had to factor some calculus into that, which was, what research can we do that can get done in time for it to matter? And that heavily limited the sort of the scope of opportunities for us to use research to have real business impact, and led us into, at times, either foregoing research in areas that really would have benefited from it, or doing research but missing on the timing a bit, such that the research either came in too late to significantly impact our decisions, or we might have even curtailed some of our research projects because we could sort of anticipate that happening. So I think that, I've been really fortunate to work with great researchers. I know not all of my peers have been able to build research practices within their organization. I think tools like Outset are going to make it much more possible to actually bring research methodologies into more of the critical business decisions that get made. So in terms of what makes me nervous, I mean, I think we'll probably end up talking about sort of the state of play right now, but I think I'd say in general, I think products in a down cycle right now. Product management as a function, I can talk about that more. And so I think that there are a lot of product leaders that are really operating from a place of scarcity and a place of fear right now. And so we'll spend more time on that. But what that makes me fearful about is it makes me fearful that there will be that this just is not going to even pass the bar in terms of things that product leaders are thinking about. And so we need to have researchers in the organization to actually bring expertise to put tooling like Outset to use to its highest use from my perspective. And I think there's a risk that just in this moment of scarcity that there's a lot of folks that don't realize what they're missing out on because they're so under fire.
I think that's so the idea of like what happens when people make decisions from a place of fear is a really interesting one. And so I'm curious actually, so I know this isn't quite answering the question, but to Behzod, like, what do you think, what are like when companies or leaders are operating from a place of fear or scarcity or kind of, tightening of budgets and all that, like, where is research and all that, right? Because I mean, I think is research some sort of comfort of a time of abundance? Like, hopefully not, right? Yeah. So like, what do you see as the companies that you see operating maybe slightly more from a place of fear? What are they doing?
I think we definitely had a period where teams were big. Like I think some people think that research is a peacetime activity. It's like a thing that you get to do when times are easy and you have abundance. But I think if you look at any book on like building a company or running a startup or anything, like one of the first things is go talk to customers, meet people where they are. Like research has always been a really core activity. But I share, I think, April's concern, and maybe to answer your question, like I think what's happening right now is we get a lot of like research theater or people who are kind of LARPing. They're doing things that they think are valuable but aren't, and they're kind of going through the motions. And like I think you see this with a lot of the conversation around continuous discovery. I think that continuously engaging with customers is a really good thing, especially if you're building intuition in a space or things are changing really rapidly. But I think the way that a lot of that gets talked about, of like talk to X number of customers every week, is essentially about as helpful as like refilling a glass of water every hour, regardless of whether or not you're drinking. And so you do that and you're like, oh, I talk to customers every week and nothing happened from it. And so this activity isn't as valuable. But I think that I share a lot of April's optimism because typically when I work with companies and we're thinking about how to scope research or building out these kind of broader plans, the three questions I typically ask them when they're trying to scope a study is like, is this feasible to do? Especially like in the time frame that we have, is this reasonable to do? And is this worthwhile for us in terms of just like how we spend our time and energy, which is a big question right now. And I think Outset and other tools, like the surface area for this has massively expanded. So the things that are now feasible or reasonable or worthwhile to do are much bigger, and it's much easier for us to deploy people or systems to do this kind of work. So I think that we are going to see more excitement about research, but I think in that growing pain, we're going to see a lot of stuff that's not great. And we have to kind of keep our wits about us and not be too quick to judge that like, this isn't working right now, and be clear about like what is or isn't valuable in doing that.
Yeah. So what makes you most excited? What makes you most optimistic? What are you seeing that like is getting you fired up?
I think the thing that's most exciting is like almost none of my clients are researchers or research teams. Like the people that I'm working with are people in products or people in customer success who are like, we actually don't have the capacity or the budget to hire researchers, but our entire CS org talks to customers every day. Can you make us better at that? Can you help us be more thoughtful about how we engage? Can we get more out of each of these customer conversations and touch points? And so I see a huge love and a desire for research at every part of the organization. I have venture capital firms who are talking to me about like, how do we be thoughtful about diligence and actually not just like learn about companies, but like really build a decision-making process. And so I think what's really positive there is there's a huge appetite and a hunger for it. But what that looks like tomorrow probably looks pretty different than the way that I came up in the practice and like what that role is or how much time we spend on different activities. And I think we have to be thoughtful about how we adapt and work kind of from the core principles of what it is that we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to flip it over to Alec, and before you answer the kind of core questions, just like what are you sensing when if we're sticking with the theme of like decision making from a place of fear? Like what do you feel like practitioners, research practitioners, and folks in the community, like what does the place of fear mean for them? What's the impression of what's happening kind of in that concern for the future? And then let's like talk about your own kind of concerns and optimisms.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it's very clear that the fear and concerns come around how this affects employment. And I think this is the first time researchers have ever experienced a technology at least in the last 10, 20 years that is going to have a very meaningful impact on what their day-to-day actually looks like. And it's going to be, in my opinion, very dramatic, right? And there's the famous Bart Simpson cartoon or whatever it is, where it's like, this is, the what is it, the hottest summer of my life, and then it's like, no, this is the coldest summer of the rest of your life, sort of thing like that. And it's kind of like something like that. Like if you're feeling this way about AI today, this is not just the best AI you've ever had, this is the worst AI you will ever have for the rest of your life. I think, to touch on the main question around like optimism and concern, I mean, the main optimism, I think, is very straightforward. I think we'll see the volume of research increase by multiple orders of magnitude, like easily over the next 10 years. Like certainly 3, maybe 4, maybe even I'm underestimating it, right? And that will be directly a result of this technology. On the flip side of that, the main concern I have is that a lot of people who today are active in the field are going to end up being left behind, and not because they didn't have the chance at it, but because they were trying to fight the technology, right? And, I think as I've been looking at AI and these other things, and I've changed my mind on some things, I was super skeptical of synthetic users as a concept. I thought it was a terrible idea. I've seen some stuff that maybe now, like for survey data, synthetic users might actually be like fully legit. I'm like, okay, that's like maybe, but very different from what I've seen in the past. I think we can look to like, I don't know how familiar people are with like disruption theory, but this actually plays to what April was talking about, where today, a team like Slack, and by the way, the Slack team is like excellent. We've featured speakers from Slack at almost every one of our events for the last like 8 years, right? Including Christina, including Behzod, Mike, Massimi, tons of people. They're super duper talented. So they really know what they're talking about. Not that they needed any additional credibility from me. But one of the things that April was saying that I think is very telling is, we are having to make very difficult decisions about where we are able to invest very limited research time, right? And when you have a disruptive technology, a lot of the times it starts by serving a need that cannot currently be met by existing offerings. And if you consider the offering of research as research employees that you can deploy against a learning need that you might have, well, there's many important things that are worth learning that it's just not worth the investment. It's not profitable in the eyes of like a company from like an economic value point of view. However, if you had other avenues like a new technology, right, that was able to also do some amounts of the work, not all of the work, certainly not replace, but to take off some of the lower value stuff in a way that is economical, all of a sudden you have this like Cambrian explosion of adoption of this new technology. And I think that's clearly what we're going to see, where, for example, I think you just launched this usability testing feature. I think there's very few cases where it really makes sense today for a human to be investing their time doing a usability test after a launch. Yet, it is very valuable to do usability tests after launches because you are changing the product, right? But there's all this stuff happening and you got to coordinate with these people and those people and those. It's just a lot of work and it's a lot of difficult. And at the same time, you got to be thinking about the future and researching future needs and all that stuff. So we don't do it. But if you imagine a system that after every launch automatically deploys 1,000 usability tests to look for issues, like that is a really interesting future that would dramatically increase the volume of research. And so when I think about what the future role of research looks like, just focusing on the job itself, I think it's going to move a lot more away from doing research activities like interviews and usability, still doing some, but a lot less, and more towards designing experiments or designing systems that learn things, right? And hopefully later on in the conversation, Behzod and I can talk about our analogy to artisanal cheesemakers and UX research, but that can come later on.
That's a good tease. Okay, we'll come back to that.
Cue that one up.
Yeah, cue that one up. All right. I definitely am not the one who came up with this analogy, but I definitely love the idea of like the role goes from, like in a symphony, goes from the violinist to the conductor, right? There's some shift from the kind of pure practitioner of one specialty to the strategist that conducts the entire thing. And I think that's kind of like that always like rung true with me in a lot of ways. But I love where you're going with that, Alec, of like the disruption of how it's a lot of like, there's a lot of like weird, how does it fit resistance at first? Because there's not necessarily perfect replacements for everything. Like things have to change a bit. I don't know if you spoke to this much, but do you want to speak for a moment of what you're worried about? What does a bad future look like here, either with technology or with culture, or kind of what research teams and will look like going forward? Like what are you worried about?
Is that to me?
Yeah. Sorry.
I do feel like this tech, it's hard for me to, and I generally don't like looking at things as like good or bad. It's more like, let's just describe the effects and see where we kind of end up. But I think the one scenario that I can foresee is we lose a lot. Like it's possible that as we go ahead in the next 5 years, there's a lot of the, I'll put in air quotes, leaders in the field choose to fight the technology, fail to adapt to what's coming out, and then we lose a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge about the field, right? And I think that's plausible, and I think that would just be so sad, right? And it's one of those things where, again, coming back to why the good bads, when we talk about change as good or bad, right? You pick a side and you emphasize the negatives, and you downplay the good stuff for any given, whichever side you're against, and vice versa for when you're for. I think it's a lot more helpful to just talk about, again, just like cause and effect sort of thing. In this situation, what would the effect be? And then later on, you can say, like, do we like this or do we not like this? And I think that's kind of, I'm hoping we can have a lot more conversations about this. So for example, I think it'll take a long time for AI to be genuinely better in 100% of use cases than humans at doing usability tests, right? But that doesn't mean that there are not situations in which, based on a balance of trade-offs, it's more beneficial to be using the AI in these circumstances. And if we take this like moralistic good or bad approach, it creates this like culture among the discourse on, let's say, LinkedIn, that engaging with talking about AI is bad, or like playing around with it is bad. And I think that's the complete opposite. I think we need to go into these things with an open mind, experiment with it, try it with it, talk about the things that are bad. I've made like 3 posts on LinkedIn about AI in the past year. And like 2 of them, people were like excoriating me, like, how dare I? I'm like, what? Look, this is just a thing. It's a thing. I'm talking about the effects of the thing. I'm not even saying like per se it's good or bad, but like this is just how I see it. And if I'm getting attacked for that stuff and people are coming at me with negative comments, I'm a big boy. It doesn't bother me too much, right? But like, if you're someone who's earlier in their career where you can have the courage to fight back against that would just be a really bad future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. A question just came through the Q&A that says, where can we purchase a learner's sweatshirt? So I'll let you take that offline, Alec.
Send me an email. We've got a whole merch thing going on. I will try and hook you up.
Good. But in the meantime, I want to flip it back to April and Behzod to talk. I think just to take a quick step back, because I think we're like in a really interesting moment, but also like, how do we get here? So looking back over the last 10 years, let's say 10, 15 years, kind of what has been the evolution of the kind of executive approach towards research, like what the role was and how that has changed over time. To bring us up, and I flip back to both of you, since you're both at Slack, so it might be an interesting example of like kind of talking through either the culture there or maybe how it's reflects the culture elsewhere. But I'm just curious to throw it back. So whichever one of you wants to jump in first, but to give us a little bit of what that mindset has been.
I'll April can tell me what it looked like on the other side. I felt Slack, I think, and Alec mentioned this, like we had an incredible team, and I'm wildly biased, so I'll just be clear about that. But I think that a couple of things were at play. One was Stuart Butterfield, the CEO, had a lot of trust in us and sort of said, we know that we are going to hire you to build this team, like to Christina Janzer, who built their practice at Facebook and then came over and led the team. I was like, you will not be able to cover everything we need. And I trust you to say no and focused on the highest priority, highest impact stuff. And I think that was an incredible blessing and gave us a lot of air cover to be really strategic and thoughtful about how we partner. But we always felt that research mattered. And there were too many things that the company didn't know and too many decisions that needed to be made that there was always going to be work for us to do. And the challenge was not finding work. It was choosing the highest leverage things that would move the business forward and sort of earn our right to exist tomorrow. And so some of that was going and actually spending time with all of the different leaders, so people who ran like one part of the product area and another part, and saying, what are the big decisions you're trying to make? What would it look like for us to increase the certainty or confidence that you're going to, be able to move forward? Then us looking across the company and saying, where are we trying to talk to the same customers or dealing with the same problems, and going back and saying, hey, you, like Elon, who ran the enterprise team, and Buster, who ran the platform team, like, you guys actually have a shared audience here in terms of admins on Slack. Can we bridge these efforts? And if we do this in Q1, does that meet both of your needs, right? And it felt like we were really partners in that world. And I think that was true at Facebook, and it's true for a lot of my peers, that like research has been a valued exercise. But I think that the thing that Slack probably did differently, and I'd be curious April's take, and Christina probably is one of the best people to speak about this, was we were always focused on what was going to drive the business forward. And I think probably for many of us, we were pretty low ego about this. Like, we didn't care that we were the ones who were getting to do the work. And Slack had an incredible set of partners in our developer relations team, in our biz dev team, in the folks who did M&A, in the customer success team. And so a lot of my work on the research ops side was actually empowering them to go and do the research that we would never be able to staff. And so I think we took a more holistic and collective approach to how do we as a business make the right decisions for the business and gather the evidence we need to move forward, and get that to April or Stuart or Cal or whoever that was on the executive team that needed those things, and divorce ourselves from being like, I'm the one in the room presenting, so research gets credit. Like, we knew that our job was to move the business forward, and we were going to win or lose as a business, not as a team or as an individual. April, you're muted.
Thanks. So then I think, like, let's get real about the applicability of our experience at Slack to today. So Behzod, did you wrap up your time in Slack in 2020?
2020.
2020. Yeah. And I left in 2019. So a few years have transpired since then. Slack had effectively unlimited access to capital. Slack was at its time, and maybe still, the fastest growing SaaS application ever. And there's a bunch of hard work that went into that. But like, I think any of us would admit that like a lot of that growth was happening to us, not because of us. And like because of a handful of really smart decisions that turned out to be right early on in the life of the business. And then we all had our work was to be the stewards of that, to find the edges of where does the brilliance of that original strategy and vision end. One example of that being, some of the more midterm sort of research that we did that actually had business impact was not just that like 50,000 foot view, but would not have necessarily gotten prioritized had the research team not been so, I think, resourceful and as Behzod alluded to, low ego about how they covered the ground they needed to cover, was some work done by Mike Massimi, who actually went out to answer the question, like, how do real people feel about their email? And the answers were counterintuitive for us, because we were so, in the bubble of email is the past, everybody's going to communicate in channel-based communication is the future, all this sort of stuff. And Stuart and I, and a lot of us in big decision-making roles, really honed our gut instincts by talking to lots of customers who were very bought into Slack, because if they had access to the Slack executive team, they were pretty bought into Slack. So we went out, Mike went out and did this research and brought back like the news from the field, which is that there are people that love their email. They you're gonna have to pry their inbox out of their cold dead hands. And that was a really important insight for us that we would not have gotten to had we not had access to be able to invest in research as a practice, a research team. But a lot has transpired since then. That is not the reality for most companies today. Like, let's just, like, I'll take from a standpoint of product, like, and I haven't been in that product leadership role during this time period, but you had, product holding accountability without, full authority during a time period that included COVID, the end of the last boom cycle, like rifts, a variety of cultural things happening in the background that just made the world feel very heavy for employees. No liquidity events or exits for employees to be able to, to actually see the financial upside of maybe years of investments that they put into into these companies with their hard work. And so, product leaders, sort of come out of that. So they're accountable in a leadership role at the top of the PM cycle during this, very challenging period. Then the PMs get fired on stage at the Figma conference. On LinkedIn, et cetera, or at least they get a title change to product marketing. Then you've got AI come about. And I think, frankly, when new technologies come about, whether it's AI, whether it was mobile, product should lead from behind. Most of the time, product is not going to connect those not last mile, but the last 10 miles, which is like, how do you actually take this technology and make it really usable by normal people? I think that is almost always the role of design. Sometimes it's engineering. It's less often product. And then now you got founder mode. So, you've got founder mode, which is like effectively like a recall in product management and on roadmaps and on, a lot of the things that have been done to scale PDE efforts. So I think, this is not a poor product manager webinar, but if it were, I would say product folks are in a tough spot right now. So what they need the tools to be able to make great decisions, do less with more. They need to show their work. They need to be able to prove it in a way that they haven't always needed to be able to, and they have to put the customer at the center because none of us have it figured out right now. Like nobody actually knows how people are going to use generative AI in a lasting, long-term basis that can actually be monetized. So there are a lot of these large questions that are looming over us, which is why something like Outset and in general, these tools that make research more accessible to more organizations at a smaller investment with less expertise in the house that can actually bring the truth to the conversation, regardless of whether product asks for it or design asks for it or engineering asks for it or research asks for it, are more important than ever because we've got big questions to tackle. So I just want to give that, that perspective, which is I think if you're a product leader right now trying to take notes on like, how do we do things at Slack? I don't know if that's available to you. I think we were incredibly lucky for some reasons that didn't have that much to do with us. And I think the world is different now. But thankfully, we've got products coming to the market that actually mean that we can try to scale some of those things that worked in a prior era and apply them in new ways today.
Yeah, the one of the last things you mentioned there that resonates across everything you and Behzod just said was like the search for the truth. That the truth coming into conversations is really ultimately what a low ego research team would do. Where it's not about who gathered the thing or who found the insight or whatever. It's just like, what is the ground truth? And that is, as you say, today, that is the challenge, right? Most companies have cut their staff across PM, design, research. There are fewer people to do it, but all the decisions still need to be made, right? Revenue still is there. It's not like everything's crashed or anything. And so the question is, what is the ground truth? And like, how do you get that? So I kind of, like one of the other questions I had, which is along those lines of just like, it's not just about researchers, it is about the broader kind of community of people who are building. So the word that I feel like is always, every time I use the word, somebody gets either mad or happy or angry or throws something at me is democratization. So there's always a question of like, what does it mean to distribute the capabilities, the skill sets, the whatever it is of research to non-researchers or people who don't have that in their title. So I'm curious I'll start with you, Alec, and maybe Behzod, you won't help but raise your hand and jump in here. Like, where is that conversation now, given, let's just say, the evolution, everything we've already talked about so far? Like, what has changed? Like, April gave a great rundown of like 7 different things that have completely blown up, what the world felt like 5 years ago. So like, where's that conversation, and what do you think about that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, Behzod, how many times have we talked about democratization being done? Too many. He took his AirPods out.
Yeah, I've at least every other call for the last however many years I've known you.
Yeah. So look, if you thought those conversations were sticky, I think they're gonna like just wait. I've seen some demos now where I'm like, oh, can I swear? Oh fuck! Like that's like I was like, wow, this is crazy. Look, again, it's like fighting the technology. You can't, Behzod uses the word all the time, right? Which is like curiosity, right? So you talk about people being curious and wanting to, like, you can't stop people in an organization from like trying to get answers to the questions that they have. And you can't stop them from talking to customers that they have. And so this idea that we could, even before we became a whole thing, own this like line of work exclusively was like never there. Well, like this is about to go to a whole nother level, right? Whether you're, I'm just going to put in air quotes, a repository product, or whether you have a different way of distributing insights or whatever it is. I've seen some stuff now where I'm like, that is like a fundamental shift in the way that people in an organization are going to consume research that like I've just never seen before. Some of this is stuff I hadn't imagined before, right? And you'll see in the next 6 months, I think, a lot of it. But I just don't think it's the right conversation to have, right? And I think this is one of those situations where you're like, people are they're ready to brawl, and you just like off to the side, walk on the grass and walk around the whole thing and say like, this is not where we want to put our energy at asking about this. Let's talk about something different, which is like, maybe it's in what circumstances do we need to have a policy that like, hey, this is very important for researchers to lead. For example, if you're talking with individuals who are oppressed in some way, or who are extremely low income or whatever, it's like, listen, product manager who makes $400,000 a year total comp, or design manager is making $750. You're just not the right type of person, because you don't know what you're walking into that room with. And so I think that's a much more healthier conversation, which is, in what situations or circumstances, given the technology today, do we feel like we've got to really say this stuff has to be us? And lots of other stuff we want to distribute, democratize, because we can't stop you anyway. So hopefully we can at least guide you into doing these things in a productive and healthy way. But like, we just have to sidestep this conversation. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I knew you could get going. I just had to start you off there. Go ahead, Behzod.
I'll co-sign a lot of what Alex said. I think the thing that one of the things that people forget is the founder is the first researcher at any company. Like, the person who starts this is someone who's like, I think there is a thing here, and we have this delusion that the research practice starts when we join, which is so misguided. And I think that not only is that true, but like, our job is not to do research. We have a set of skills that we're very good at doing this thing. Like, to Alex's point, like, we should be thoughtful about the fact that we are obviously trained in certain methods and whatever, but the job is to help the company make better decisions as we move forward. And so I haven't used the orchestra conductor metaphor as much, but I really like the one of like, historically our job was to go to the well and bring back water and like help people who were thirsty. And over time it became easier to build plumbing so that people could just turn on a tap when they needed it, and like the water was there for them, right? And we had to build reservoirs to store the water and clean the water and all that kind of stuff. But like, our job moving forward is still similar. Like, we are helping people who are thirsty quench their thirst. We have better tools, we have better infrastructure, we have better systems. And yeah, Mike Massimi had to go climb to the top of a well for Slack on like some crazy mountain that we never would have been able to build plumbing towards. But that was a one-off experience because we had all sorts of other tools and systems in place that freed him from doing that kind of work and gave him months to go and climb that mountain. And I think the more that we can acknowledge that, like, our job is to help companies make good decisions, not be the person doing the research necessarily. Like, if we make it safe and accessible and, benefiting everyone who's involved, the participants, ourselves, the company, et cetera, like, we're doing our job just as much as if we're the person talking to the customer. And I think that's the thing that I loved April's call out of like how much is different from the world that we were in, and like the different levels of privilege that were, or conditions that were true there. I think the thing that has preserved is that there will still be many disciplines who are trying to do this. And the more that we take a systemic view of how do we build tools and infrastructure and frameworks that support people doing this work that need to do the work, the better off we will be. And I think that's where the more we play with these tools, the more we understand what does or doesn't work, the more we understand where they can harm or other, endanger participants, the better off we are. There was a question here about like, how do we trust some of these systems? Like, you trust them by playing with them and using them and breaking them and figuring out where they don't work, right? And that's a part of when I ran research off at Slack, a big job was doing tool evaluations, and we had criteria by like, how does this work, and is this safe, and is this compliant, and et cetera. We need to be that rigorous with the tools that we bring on, but then we need to like get out of the way and let people do the work that we just gave them the tool to go do, and figure out what else we can build so that there's more infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of comments on that I just want to build upon. I mean, the idea of the founder being the first researcher, I mean, this is something I learned from Stuart Butterfield at Slack, and I learned it both because he had the self-awareness to be able to articulate it, but also just by observing it, which is that, a lot of times within companies, there's this accusation that's made, which is that the founders making decisions based on gut. And like that gut is the enemy, and that like data is like on some moral high ground. And then, the reality is that gut is trained by 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 data points. And the earlier you start within a company, the more time has elapsed for you to collect those data points. And those data points are both based on actual data, but also talking to customers. And so I think, one thing I just want to pose is maybe 90, 95% of the different types of research tools that are used to answer critical business and customer questions can actually be addressed over the next handful of years using with some sort of augmentation, supplementation, support from AI-powered tools. Maybe that's true, but that does not mean that 95% of the time spent with customers should go away. There are a million other reasons to spend time with customers, from a sales standpoint, from a engagement standpoint, but also from a gut training standpoint. And so founders need to do that. Product folks need to do that. Designers need to do that. They need to do all of that. And even if that is not purpose built, meaning I have a question to ask today, I have 10 questions to ask, and I need the answer, so I need to like get on the phone with them. But instead, really spending time with them to actually understand the motivation there, to build that relationship, et cetera. There are a bunch of reasons that go beyond answering business questions, especially the ones that need to be answered, to spend time with customers. So I just want to call that out, because I think if any team thinks that generative AI means that there no longer need to be real direct customer interaction, they're missing the point. They're both undervaluing what research can do, but they're also undervaluing like the reasons why you do that in the first place, from my point of view.
I love that. I love the idea that like your gut is basically just qualitative research done over a very long time, right? I mean, it's basically that's you're training a almost like an AI system or something, right? You're just kind of training this like response system where you just have so much data built up that you can just do that.
Aaron,
I love that. And Behzod, to your sorry, Alec, go ahead.
I just want to. Can we talk about cheese for just 1 minute here, because I think it's very relevant. Okay,
just take it away.
So look, and this is from this conversation we had before, but when Behzod and I were talking a few months ago, we were reflecting on the fact that it feels like 99% of the UX research practice today it looks kind of similar to like crafting of artisanal cheeses, right? So you have like people in the French, in France and in Italy, and they are hand milking the cows, and they take them and they put the cheese things in caves, and they take them out and they mature. And you make some incredible cheese that way. Like, honestly, it's like $1,000 a gram or whatever. Who cares? Very expensive stuff. However, you're not making a lot of it. And so and then Behzod made a quip, which is like, yeah, that cheese is great, but 99% of like Americans eat Baby Bell, right? And so the real comment, right, on this is like, the entire field operates like we are artisanal craftspeople, which is great, and it's fine to have those skills. But the reality is that when you go into almost any field, there's a huge need for just like caloric requirements and nutrient requirement versions of what they do rather than the craft version, right? And 99% of the cheese that's eaten is just pumped out at a very low cost on an assembly line, and that's what we eat. And so as a field, we haven't been able, the technology hasn't been there to do that sort of the work. So we've only focused on the artisanal stuff. Today, the technology is there. And so, the challenge I have to any researcher is like, if you look at your craft today, to what extent does it look like artisanal cheese craft making? And how would you start to do a little bit more factory produced cheese? Thank you again for listening. Nice pun. That's great, Aaron.
First of all, you kept saying craft while talking about cheese. So I was like,
10 out of 10. That's good stuff.
The other thing is like, now all I have in my head, so Behzod talking about the plumbing analogy, and then you talk about the cheese analogy. I'm just imagining setting up taps that just dump out cheese. And that's basically where we're at now. But I will say, okay, just to bring it back, and then I want to transition to some Q&A questions, because there's lots of very interesting questions here. Just to wrap up one bit, is just like the plumbing point of just like the role of researchers is often to build the plumbing, not just go to the well. And I would actually just say, to expand that, especially to some of what April, you talked about, like that has been a transition and is continuing to become more and more of the design role and the PM role, and actually a lot of roles, right? Because like technology means that we are, AI means that you're creating these kind of automated decision-making agents or systems. That means you are now augmented with a really helpful technology, which means your role is going to be less practitioner and more, call it plumbing, system building, or system thinking, or strategist. So it's actually like, I think sometimes, in all the little mini industries of research and PM and design or whatever, kind of like there's a little bit of like, oh, we're suffering this kind of change, we have to adapt, but everybody has to go through this. Like, I think, I was a PM for a number of years back in the day. I think if I were to go be a PM tomorrow, it'll be a lot different than what I remember. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. But with all this, talk about plumbing, I want to transition to a number of Q&A points about both the role of the researcher in the future, but particularly through the lens of an early career person. So it's like when you think about looking forward, and you're kind of going to go, if you're going to go back to school, to use one of the question askers words, like what is important in the role of research now? Like what should folks learn? What do they want to know? What's going to set them up well for whatever the future is for the next decade? I think that question came up along with the question of like, is AI creating some sort of kind of challenge to early career folks getting into this, right? So I guess if you could answer a little bit of that, anybody's welcome to jump in if you have thoughts.
I feel like Alec is probably closer to a lot of these folks than I am, but I think that I'll answer in reverse. Like, there's probably a challenge in that, like, I know I was hired as like a very junior researcher and I was supervised to do work. And so I think there's definitely a difference now where many businesses, to April's point and the points that were made, like, don't have the budget or the bandwidth to bring on as many junior people and to mentor them. And this is like why Christina Janzer and I built the Research Associates program and other things, because like we felt like we needed to hire and train people up. And I think a lot of that's gone away, unfortunately. But I think that to the first question, like if I was going to go back to school and I want to do this kind of work, what do I pay attention to? I think the most important thing is thinking about understanding how the business works. And I said this on a GrowthMates podcast, probably not just because it's GrowthMates, but like everyone's job, growth is everyone's job, right? Like your business needs to acquire the right customers, deliver enough value that those people like engage and retain, and then you need to monetize effectively so that you can like continue to provide that service and run the business. And like everything you do has to ladder up to one of those things, with the exception of like actually running the company, ops, legal, HR, whatever. And so I think understanding how companies function and how do you tie the work that you're doing to the business decisions that are going to keep the business alive and growing is really important. And I think that we've too often been like, we're the defenders of the user and our job is to play telephone and to translate what people need. And it's like, your job is to understand how do we continue delivering value to the right people tomorrow so that they can use our tool for whatever it is that they need to get done. And like, stop working on a lot of the other stuff that feels really good, but probably doesn't matter, because then you become part of a cost center and then you are the first person to go when the business doesn't have enough money to pay for you.
Yeah, it's understanding how what you do ladders up to the business is both makes you a better practitioner in whatever you're doing, and also helps everybody around you understand your importance of your work. And so it's kind of a both a growth and self-preservation kind of tactic that I think actually just makes a ton of sense.
It also makes you much more critical of like the business, right? Like if you will be much quicker to realize that you're working for an organization that you're not excited about if you understand how the business makes money doing whatever it's doing, right? And I think there's a lot of people who choose not to engage with that, and then they get mad that their company does X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, you worked there, you chose this, like you should understand these things. And
yeah. Any additions? I mean, I'm happy to move on, but I don't know if Alec, you had any thoughts there for the kind of.
Look, again, just coming back to what I was saying before of like trying not to look at it as good or bad or easier or harder. Let's just call it, it's definitely different. You know, a lot of times when people would join a company, they'd be just doing usability tests for the first little while, and that was a way to get their feet wet, right? Well, if AI is going to do a lot of that stuff, which I expect it to do, right, then you're going to need, like, that's gone, right? Well, so that's obviously a negative, right? But, you know, what's the flip side of that coin? Well, if I were in that situation, I'd be trying to like see if I can get a subscription to some tool and usability test the shit out of everything, right? And just start designing usability testing systems. And then you can send an email to some hiring manager and be like, yeah, no, I'm really super into research. In fact, I've been doing thousands and thousands of research studies a month, right? Through this usability testing, whatever. Here are some examples. And so again, I think that the role is going away from, or transitioning from being a little bit more oriented towards the activities of research to designing of research activities. And so if you can practice that early in your career, I think you're going to set yourself up better for that. And so, you know, in some ways it's actually a net benefit, because everyone you're competing for a job with that's been in the field for many more years than you have has more experience doing research as it was done. Well, now we're about to go into research to as it will be done, which is looking quite a bit different. So a lot of that past experience your competition has for that role is kind of a moot point. So
yeah. Okay, so I just want to be mindful of time. We're cooking here, so we blew through the hour. There's a number more Q&A questions, so I would love we'll probably stay on for another 5-7 minutes to answer a few more. But I know probably many people are watching this in the middle of their work days, so if you have to run, totally fine. I just wanted to thank you all for joining. So I'll say it again in 10 minutes, but thank you all for joining. Thanks for sticking with us. Like, as a reminder, if you joined, you know about Outset. We hosted this, so please reach out if you're curious about learning about AI tools, yourself or for your company. Let us know whether it's usability or market research or broader discovery or concept testing. Like, this is something that we love to talk about and love to work with you on. So please reach out to us or book a demo with us. But regardless of that, there's a couple more questions that I want to get to for the next few minutes. So let's bring it back from my closing remarks, which I'll just give again in 10 minutes. So I think one question is just like about time to do research. So do PMs, designers, engineers realistically have time to do their own research? We talked about them, doing research at the company the person's asking about, but in reality, their plates are already full. What's been your experience with this? So I think you can speak to researchers or non-researchers, but just like at this point, especially with, call it, smaller teams, more limited resources, how do you think about the time to do it?
I mean, I don't think they have a choice. Yeah, like most of the companies I work with, those are the people who are doing that work, right? And I think for like, if I'm a product manager, my job is to make sure that I'm building and delivering value to my customers, then I will do whatever it takes to make sure that I feel confident that we are doing that we've built this well, that we understand who we're, so I think there's this almost like ZERP era ideal that we have that like research teams are huge and they're going to cover everything. Like the vast majority of companies are like not that big. They have a handful of product managers. Those product managers need to do this work. And so they are doing whatever they can to talk to customers and understand how to make better decisions. And I don't know that they have as much time as they would like to do this. Almost no one I work with has had as much time as they would like to do it, but they figure out how to make that work. So it's a reality more than a luxury.
Yeah. April, go ahead.
I think also like some history here. I think that, coming out of like the search era, particularly Google, there was such a focus on, bucket testing and just like effectively like test in production. And so, but, I think like something like that never worked for team productivity tools or other team-based tools. You actually can't just have, 10% of of the users in a given organization getting a different experience than the other 90%. That just fundamentally doesn't work. So it never really worked for SaaS. And then even for consumer, with a shift to, more folks trying to figure out how to monetize outside of advertising, I think that it is, with subscription services, there is an onus on the company to do the work to ship high quality product and to understand the customer needs before they ship it. And so I think that, I think we're still in this transition from this like ship it to production, see what the data says, and like let the data answer the question, to understanding that the data doesn't always tell the truth. And also the data tells the truth about the customers you have today, but not the next set of customers that you're trying to acquire. And so, I think that I think that it's true that historically there have been a lot of folks that would have leaned on research teams or just leaned on other methodologies to try to answer these questions. I think that the cost of shipping the wrong thing to production is higher than ever right now. Like in terms of like you have scarcer resources, so like the trade-offs are massive. But on top of that, you've got consumers they're going to move on, and you're unlikely to get them back. And so I think I think that I think maybe it's not positioned as research, but like going to find out what the problems are and gain more conviction in the solution you're developing to address them, I think is absolutely. I think the PMs, designers, and engineers that are successful during this era will be great at that, and they will use whatever whatever tools are at their disposal to do that. I think that's always been true. So
yeah. Well, let's I know there's only a few minutes left, so I want to wrap with one question, and maybe each of you can kind of give a little bit of an answer. And I think this kind of speaks to a number of the questions in the Q&A, which is kind of like, I think one person talks about, I don't fear being left behind on a personal level as a researcher, but I fear that companies will reduce the number of humans they're willing to invest in who have the expertise. And so I think there's an interesting question there. Like we talk about optimism around tools, optimism around kind of building plumbing and how we can kind of evolve the role. Like how would you describe maybe briefly of like, what is uniquely human here? Like what is human? What will be human? What do we need to be thinking about going forward about the role of a human, regardless of what the technology becomes and how we learn from our users and our customers and our markets, right? Like, so I think I see several of you are thinking a little bit. I'll throw it to Alec first.
Yeah, just to have a hard stop in a couple minutes here. But look, there's like a great quote that's out there, which is someone just said recently, which is like, when the next 5 years, and maybe it was Mark Andreessen or something, like humans are only going to need to work 2 days a week, and everything's going to be taken care of and whatnot. But the funny thing is, if you can go back in history, you can see that quote again and again and again, because it's not the first technological revolution that we've had, right? And so it used to be that 95% of Americans worked on a farm. Well, that number is now 1%, but we produce like 100 times more food than we did in 1776, right? I say we, I'm a Canadian, close enough. Anyway, look, I think the one thing that has been held true over time, and I think Jeff Bezos has mentioned this, is that customers are just like unbelievably unsatisfiable, right? And if you just look at like ChatGPT, there's a thing that came out recently that's like ChatGPT's user growth or number of users is down like 20%, over like 6 months. We invented like fucking crazy AI shit, and we're just like, yeah, all right, that was cool for like, it was a fun quarter or two of talking to the new super god, but I guess we're done here. That was whatever. We move on, right? And so I think if you think about like, why are you here, right? Understanding how people's needs are changing over time, and our desires for connection, our desires for spirituality, our desires for like companionship, our desires for sustenance, our desires for feeling status. No amount of product will ever satiate this. And so if you just keep looking for how those things are changing, right, it's possible that AIs will do this in 10, 20 years. Color me skeptical, but it's, I've been wrong before. So I think if you just focus on like, if your role is understanding what people want, right, at some level. And then now you just have new tools. And instead of doing 5 user interviews a week or 5 usability tests a week, you're going to do 5 million, right? And you're going to design the systems that do those things, and it's going to be great, right? But like, be prepared to experiment with the stuff, roll with the punches, and stay focused on the thing that matters, which is people are still want more shit.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Feel free to jump off as I
I
think
will.
you have
It's great to see y'all. Hope y'all had fun. Feel free to call me out and say mean things about me on LinkedIn if you disagree with anything I said.
I will.
See you later.
It's called engagement.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think the thing that's uniquely human is heart, like, you know, and I think the way that oftentimes manifests, like in the context of what we're discussing today, is when, you know, you as a builder spend time with customers or prospective customers, and you have that serendipitous moment that can happen where you come to understand something about them that you hadn't thought to ask. And then that becomes like this seminal story you use when you talk to the next person, and then that connects to them because they recognize that as something that is like deeply human, that is like something that they might not have vocalized. Like that, like creating those threads and creating community and showing up in a way with whether it's voice, tone, visual, style, you know, edge or whatever, in a way that like speaks to a certain audience. Like those things, I think those things, you know, for me are what I would call like the heart of a product or the heart of, you know, of your customers. And I think that I think that we spent too much time trying to tackle, get into people's heads and into their pocketbooks. But like, I think now we as humans can focus more in those areas. And, you know, I do think AIs are going to be pretty good at getting into people's heads and probably their pocketbooks as well. But I think humans have an edge on the heart.
Last thought, Behzod?
I don't want to follow that. That was great. I feel like the thing that's maybe related to what April's saying is like the thing that feels still uniquely human is sort of sense making and just like really.
Yeah.
And I'm biased here because I spent a number of years working on the Facebook advertiser tools. And so I worked on like really large insights platforms where we were sharing tons of data and helping drive decisions for companies. And the quality of our ability to help make decisions was completely dependent on how much context we had. And I think that there's still so much work that goes into giving these systems enough context to make good decisions that there will always be an opportunity for humans to be involved in, like, given what we see, what should we be doing and how should we be doing these things and how do we be thoughtful about that? And I think you saw that in a lot of the older like AI experiments in the chess world against people like Garry Kasparov. I also think that there are, to Alec's point, there's like an infinite number of things to build. I've had the fortune of working with like city governments over the last year, and all these places I think that we don't typically associate. Like we think that there are only tech companies to work at, but there are so many businesses. I mean, April started a company working with small businesses in like local economies. Like there's so much room for us to go and provide value. And I think if we stop being a little heads down and start being a little more heads up and say, given like what we're able to do, where can we be valuable? There are like so many places to play. And I hope that's what people do more of.
I love that. It's the capital S synthesis, right? The synthesizing the world, the bringing the kind of emotional, the heart, the everything together. So I think it's a nice place to end. Thank you, Behzod. Thank you, April. Thanks to Alec. I'll give him some LinkedIn hate after this. Thank you, everybody, for joining. If you're still on, this is amazing. Please reach out to any of us. Please reach out to us about Outset, and we'll do this again soon. So with that, thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks.